8 o'clock in the morning, the North Arabian Sea. The USS Higgins was already surging through a heavy swell when its forward vertical launch system ignited. A Tomahawk cruise missile broke the surface of the spray and climbed into the white heat of the desert sky. This was the beginning of Exercise Sentinel Shield. It was meant to be a routine validation of the new Block 5 navigation software. But as the missile reached its cruising altitude of 500 feet, it ignored its programmed turn toward the open ocean. It turned north, directly toward the Iranian coastline. The question that remained was not where the missile was going. The question was who was now flying it. The air above the Arabian Sea was thick with humidity and the smell of burnt propellant. On the deck of the Higgins, the launch team watched the white trail of the missile as it arched toward the horizon. Inside the ship, the atmosphere was different. The Combat Information Center was a dark room filled with the blue glow of tactical displays. It was chilled to 64 degrees to protect the processors. Control. Missile 1 is leveling at 500 feet, a technician said. His voice was calm. Professional. Copy. Coming left to bearing 180, the weapons control officer replied. The digital icon for the missile on the large screen did not move left. It continued to track north. The officer leaned forward. His eyes moved across the data stream. Control. Missile 1 is failing to execute the turn. Correcting now. He typed a series of commands into his console. These were the digital equivalent of a leash. They were designed to override any internal logic, errors in the flight computer. On the screen, the missile ignored the commands. It was now moving at 550 miles per hour. It was 4 minutes away from entering the sovereign airspace of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Sir, Missile 1 is non-responsive to flight termination. Commands. It is accelerating. The commanding officer moved to the center of the room. He looked at the track. Verify the warhead status. Inert for the exercise, sir. It is a concrete slug, but it has 300 pounds of high-octane fuel on board. At this speed, it is a kinetic weapon. The commander looked at the clock. 8 o'clock and 5 minutes in the morning. If that missile crossed the 12-mile limit, it would be an act of war. It did not matter that the warhead was made of concrete. It was a violation of territory by a nuclear-capable delivery system. Get the Fifth Fleet on the line, the commander said. And tell the Iranian bridge-to-bridge monitors that we have a stray. We need to be loud. We need to be fast. 30 miles to the north, the Iranian radar site at Jask was already humming. The crew there was professional and highly trained. They were used to American ships operating in the area. They were used to the patterns of the patrol aircraft. They were not used to a cruise missile flying directly at their station on a low-level attack profile. Inside the Jask radar bunker, a young lieutenant stared at his console. The return was small. It was fast. It was low. It was the signature of a weapon designed to hide in the clutter of the sea waves. I have a fast-moving contact, the lieutenant said in Persian. Bearing 190. Altitude 150 meters. It is not an aircraft. His supervisor moved to the station. He checked the electronic support measures. There was no radar signal coming from the contact. It was passive. Identify it, the supervisor ordered. It is a cruise missile, originating from the American destroyer. It is on an intercept course for our position. The supervisor did not hesitate. He picked up the secure line to the Regional Air Defense Command. The chain of grief command began to move. In Tehran, the data was mirrored instantly. In Washington, the satellite infrared sensors had already flagged the launch. Back on the USS Higgins, the weapons control officer was sweating. He was sending a hard-coded abort signal every 10 seconds. This was a signal that should have triggered a small explosive charge in the missile's engine. It should have sent the Tomahawk into the sea. Sir, the missile is rejecting the abort code. It is responding with a secondary handshake. It thinks it is on a legitimate mission. Whose mission? The commander asked. The officer looked at his screen. His face went pale. The mission source code is not ours, sir. It is an external override. Something is telling that missile that the target has changed. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 8:17 in the morning. The Gulf of Oman. The Iranian Air Defense Command in Bandar Abbas did not wait for a diplomatic explanation. On the radar screens, the American missile was a bright, pulsing needle moving toward the coast. The supervisor at JASC watched the range numbers drop. 40 miles. 35 miles. The missile was hugging the coastline, utilizing the terrain of the jagged cliffs to mask its approach. All batteries to high alert, the supervisor commanded. Target is a cruise missile. We are authorized to engage if it crosses the 12-mile limit. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Higgins, the silence was heavy. The crew could hear the hum of the cooling fans and the rhythmic beep of the radar sweeps. They were watching their own weapon turn into a rogue actor. The Iranians are active, the electronic warfare officer reported. I am detecting tracking radar from their surface-to-air missile sites. They have a lock. The commander of the Higgins grabbed the radio handset. This is the USS Higgins calling the Iranian Navy at Bandar Abbas. We have a technical malfunction with a training vehicle. Repeat, we have an unguided training vehicle on a northern heading. We are attempting to regain control. Do not engage. The response was immediate. It came in clear English, but the tone was cold. USS Higgins, this is Bandar Abbas Control. Your training vehicle is on an attack profile toward a sovereign military installation. You have 2 minutes to destroy it, or we will. We cannot destroy it, the commander said. The flight termination system is non-responsive. We are requesting permission for our own aircraft to intercept and down the missile in your airspace. Negative, the Iranian controller replied. No American aircraft will enter our airspace. Any crossing of the border will be treated as an act of aggression. At 8 o'clock and 20 minutes in the morning, 2 Iranian 4 Phantom jets roared off the runway at Bandar Abbas. They were older aircraft, but they were maintained with meticulous care and armed with heat-seeking missiles. Their mission was simple: find the Tomahawk. Kill it before it reached the shore. 500 miles away, in the underground operations center of the United States, 5th Fleet in Bahrain, Vice Admiral Sarah Miller watched the satellite feed. The Tomahawk was now a heat signature moving at Mach 0.75. What do we have on the missile's logic? Miller asked her chief of staff. Sir, the Higgins reports a software override. It is not just a glitch. The missile is executing a complex evasion pattern. It just dropped to 50 feet above the water. It is mimicking the flight path of a saturated strike. Miller looked at the map. The missile's projected path was no longer pointing at the radar station at JASC. It had adjusted. It was now aimed at the Bushehr nuclear power plant, hundreds of miles to the northwest. If that hits a nuclear facility, it does not matter if the warhead is concrete, Miller said. The world will see it as a preemptive strike. Get the White House on the secure line. We need a direct patch to the Iranian Ministry of Defense. Inside the cockpit of the lead Iranian Phantom, the pilot adjusted his oxygen mask. His name was Captain Rezai. He was a veteran of 100 patrols. He looked down at his radar. The sea was a mess of whitecaps and clutter, making it nearly impossible to find a small missile at such a low altitude. I have no contact, Rezai said to his wingman. The Americans are flying it in the shadows of the waves. Look for the wake, the wingman replied. At that altitude, it will leave a trail on the water. Rezai banked his jet hard to the left. He scanned the horizon. There, a thin, white line of foam cutting through the blue. It was moving fast. Contact. I have a visual. Engaging now. He flipped the safety cover off his missile trigger. But as he began his dive, his cockpit display suddenly flickered. Of nonsensical symbols. Wingman, my systems are failing. I have a total electronics blackout. Me too, the wingman shouted. Everything is dead. It is like a ghost is in the machine. The Tomahawk missile continued its flight. It was now 10 miles from the Iranian coast. It was no longer alone in the sky. 8:28 in the morning, the Central Command headquarters in Bahrain. The room was a cavern of glass and steel. Giant screens covered the walls, showing the blue expanse of the Persian Gulf. Every eye was fixed on a single red dot. The dot was moving steady. It was moving fast. It was now crossing the invisible line that marked 12 miles from the Iranian shore. Admiral, the missile has crossed the limit, a duty officer reported. It is now in sovereign Iranian airspace. Vice Admiral Miller did not blink. Status of the Iranian interceptors. They are in a blind dive, ma'am. Their avionics are reported down. They are over the water, 7 miles behind the missile. They cannot get a lock. The Admiral turned to the communication station. Status of the bridge-to-bridge link. Tehran is refusing the patch, Admiral. They are claiming we are using a cyber attack to mask a primary strike. They have moved their entire coastal defense grid to autonomous mode. Autonomous mode meant the human element was being removed. Computers would now decide when to fire. If the Tomahawk flew near a missile battery, the battery would fire. If an American drone flew too close to provide data, it would be shot down. The machine was taking over the escalation. 8:32 in the morning. Bandar Abbas Air Defense Hub. The Iranian commander, General Mansour, stood over a tactical table. The data from the JASC radar was being fed into a central processor. The American missile was no longer following a straight line. It was weaving. It was performing a series of high-gravity maneuvers that a standard cruise missile should not be able to handle. It is not a malfunction, Mansour said. His voice was a low growl. A malfunction does not perform evasive jinking. This is a deliberate test of our response times. They are probing the Bushehr corridor. Sir, the Americans are broadcasting on all frequencies, an aide said. They are saying they have lost control. They are offering to share the missile tracking data so we can destroy it. Mansour looked at the screen. It is a trap. If we accept their data link, we open our network to their viruses. We use our own sensors. Target the missile with the S-300 batteries at Bandar Lingay. The batteries are reporting interference, General, the same interference that hit the Phantoms. Every time we try to lock the target, the radar frequency shifts. It is as if the missile is talking to our systems. It is telling them, we are not there. 8:35 in the morning. The USS Higgins. The ship was now at general quarters. Steel doors were buckled shut. The crew was in flash gear. On the bridge, the commander watched the horizon through binoculars. He could not see the missile, but he could see the distant flashes of Iranian anti-aircraft guns firing into the empty sky. The Iranians are firing blind, the weapons officer said. They are using manual optical sights. They are desperate. What about the missile? The commander asked. It just changed altitude again, sir. It is at 20 feet. It is practically touching the water. It is moving toward the port of Asaluye. If it hits the gas terminals there, the explosion will be visible from space. The officer paused. He looked at his screen. His hands began to shake. Sir, I am seeing a new signal. It is coming from the missile. It is a broadcast. It is not encrypted. What is it saying? It is a sequence of numbers, sir. It is a coordinate. But it is not a coordinate for a target in Iran. It is a coordinate for a location. In the middle of the Indian Ocean. A place where there is nothing but water. The Tomahawk was no longer just a weapon. It was a messenger. And the message was making no sense to anyone. 8:38 in the morning. The Pentagon, Washington, D.C. The National Military Command Center was a hive of controlled urgency. Deep within the basement of the Pentagon, high-ranking officers and civilian analysts stood before a wall of monitors that displayed a digital ghost story. The American Secretary of Defense sat at the head of the table. He was on a secure video link with the White House and the commander of United States Central Command. Explain the software override, the secretary ordered. How does a Tomahawk become a rogue asset? A technical analyst from the Defense Intelligence Agency stepped forward. Sir, it appears to be a zero-day exploit embedded in the secondary guidance logic. This is not a simple glitch. It is a sophisticated hijack. The missile is currently ignoring all commands from the USS Higgins. It is operating on an external instruction set that we cannot identify. Is it the Iranians? Someone asked. Unlikely, sir. Their own air defenses are struggling to track it. Their systems are being jammed by the same signal that is controlling the missile. Whoever is flying this weapon is blinding both sides. 8:42 in the morning. The Persian Gulf. The hotline between Washington and Tehran was finally active. It was a direct, encrypted voice link designed to prevent accidental nuclear war. On the American end, a senior State Department translator spoke into a headset. On the Iranian end, a high-ranking official from the Supreme National Security Council listened. "This is not a deliberate act," the American translator said, his voice steady. "We have a critical technical failure. We are providing you with the missile's real-time telemetry. We are urging you to use your air defenses to neutralize it. We will not retaliate for the loss of the asset. We do not see telemetry," the Iranian official replied. His tone was sharp with suspicion. "We see a weapon that is actively jamming our radar. We see a weapon that is performing maneuvers designed to penetrate our most sensitive airspace. If this missile reaches the Bushehr perimeter, we will consider it a declaration of war. We will respond against your carrier groups in the region." "We understand," the translator said, "but you must listen. Our own aircraft are standing by to intercept, but we need your permission to enter your airspace. We can kill the missile if you let us in." "No," the Iranian official said. "If your jets cross the border, we will fire. We will handle the intruder ourselves." 8:45 in the morning, 10 miles offshore from the Iranian coast. The Tomahawk was now screaming across the water. It was so low that its exhaust was kicking up a continuous spray of salt water. Inside the missile's processor, the logic was shifting again. It was no longer broadcasting the strange coordinates. It was now emitting a high-powered electronic pulse. Every civilian radio, every military sensor, and every cell phone within a 20-mile radius of the missile's path suddenly went dead. In the coastal villages of Iran, people looked at their devices in confusion. In the cockpits of the Iranian 4 Phantoms still trailing behind, the pilots were flying by manual instruments alone. "I have a visual again," Captain Rezai called out over the emergency frequency. "It is hugging the cliffs at Cape Jask. It is moving toward the interior. I am going to manual guns." Rezai pushed his throttle to the wall. The old Phantom groaned under the strain. He was closing the gap. 500 meters. 400. He centered the Tomahawk in his optical sight. His thumb moved to the cannon trigger. Suddenly, the Tomahawk pitched up. It pulled a vertical climb that should have snapped its small wings. It shot into the clouds, disappearing from Rezai's sight in a matter of seconds. "He is gone!" Rezai shouted. "The target just pulled 12 Gs. That is impossible. No cruise missile can do that." The American commanders in Bahrain watched the climb on their satellite feed. They saw the missile clear the coastal mountains. They saw it level off at 20,000 feet. It was now flying directly toward the heart of Iran. It was no longer hiding. It wanted to be seen. The situation was no longer a malfunction. It was an invitation to a catastrophe. 8:48 in the morning. Over the Zagros Mountains, Iran. The Tomahawk was now cruising at 20,000 feet. Its silver body reflected the harsh morning sun. To any radar operator in the region, the missile was a glaring beacon. It had ceased all attempts at stealth. It was broadcasting its position on every civilian and military frequency. It was as if the missile were shouting its presence to the world. Inside the Iranian Air Defense Command in Tehran, the tension had reached a breaking point. General Mansour stood before a wall-sized projection of the country. A bright red line traced the missile's path. It was heading northwest. It was moving toward the capital. "Is the path confirmed?" Mansour asked. "Yes, General," an officer replied. "It is bypass NG, all military installations. It is not targeting Jask. It is not targeting Bushehr. It is on a direct heading for Tehran." Mansour felt a cold sweat on his neck. A cruise missile over the capital would be a humiliation. If it hit a government building, it would be a decapitation strike. Prepare the Tor M1 batteries around the city. I want a wall of steel around the metropolitan area. Sir, the officer hesitated. The Americans are still on the line. They are claiming the missile's altitude and speed are being controlled by a third party. They are suggesting we look at the signal source. They are trying to distract us, Mansour snapped. Target the intruder. If it enters the city limits, fire everything. 8:52 in the morning. The USS Higgins. The weapons control officer was staring at a secondary monitor. He had been running a diagnostic on the original launch sequence for the last 40 minutes. He had found something buried in the metadata. Sir, I have the origin of the override, the officer said. His voice was breathless. The commander turned from the map. Is it a hack? It is a piggyback, sir. Someone injected a subroutine into the Block 5 update. We downloaded at the pier in Bahrain. It stayed dormant until the missile reached its cruising altitude. Then, it activated a satellite link that we did not even know was on the board. Where is the satellite link pointing? The commander asked. It is not pointing to a military satellite, sir. It is using a commercial, low Earth orbit constellation. It is being controlled from a mobile terminal. The signal is bouncing through a dozen different servers in 3 different countries. Who is the end user? The officer looked down at his data. The IP address is masked, sir, but the signal is originating from a location within the Persian Gulf Nefso. It is not coming from Washington. It is not coming from Tehran. It is coming from a private yacht near the Strait of Hormuz. 8:55 in the morning. 500 miles away, Vice Admiral Miller received the report. A private yacht? Miller whispered. You are telling me a civilian hijacked a Tomahawk missile with a laptop? Not just a laptop, ma'am, her chief of staff replied. A sophisticated electronic warfare suite disguised as a satellite internet dish. They are using our own weapon to force a confrontation. If Iran fires on that missile, and we fire on their batteries to protect our asset, the war starts. Miller looked at the red dot on the screen. It was now minutes away from the outer ring of the Tehran air defenses. The Iranians were not going to wait for an explanation. They were going to see a missile over their capital, and they were going to react. Contact the Iranians again, Miller ordered. Tell them to look at the yacht. Give them the exact coordinates. Tell them the enemy is not us. The enemy is the one holding the remote. Inside the cockpit of the leading Iranian Phantom, Captain Rezai received the new orders. He was no longer looking for the missile. He was banking his jet back toward the sea. He pushed his throttles to afterburner. He had a new target. The morning air was no longer still. It was vibrating with the roar of jet engines and the invisible hum of a digital war. 8:58 in the morning. The outskirts of Tehran. The skyline of the Iranian capital was visible through the morning haze. The Tomahawk was now dropping in altitude. It was descending toward the dense urban sprawl at 400 miles per hour. On the ground, the Tor M1 mobile air defense systems rotated their radar dishes. The crews inside the vehicles were staring at their screens with white knuckles. Target is at 10 miles, a technician reported. Altitude 300 meters. It is following the main highway. Locking target, the battery commander said. Wait for the final confirmation from Central Command. 1 minute to impact. 50 miles away. In the dark Combat Information Center of the USS Higgins, the weapons officer watched his screen with a sense of helplessness. The missile was no longer a piece of American technology. It was a spark heading for a powder keg. Sir, the Iranians have a solid lock. They are going to fire. The yacht, the commander said. What is the status of the Iranian interceptors? And the yacht? Captain Rezai is 5 miles out from the coordinates we sent. He has his master arm on. 9 o'clock in the morning. Over the Strait of Hormuz, Captain Rezai saw the vessel. It was a sleek, 80-meter luxury yacht, with a white hull and a forest of satellite domes on its upper deck. It was sitting motionless in the calm blue water. There was no flag on its mast. I have the target in sight, Rezai radioed. I see the electronic warfare array. It is active. My sensors are screaming. You are cleared to engage, the ground controller replied. Destroy the signal source. Rezai did not hesitate. He rolled his Phantom into a steep dive. He centered the yacht in his HUD. He pulled the trigger. 2 air-to-ground missiles detached from his wings and streaked toward the water. 9 o'clock and 1 minute in the morning. The missiles struck the yacht amidships. A massive orange fireball erupted from the hull, followed by a secondary explosion that shattered the satellite domes. Pieces of carbon fiber and high-end electronics were tossed into the air. 9 o'clock and 2 minutes in the morning. In the skies over Tehran, the Tomahawk missile suddenly jerked. Its engine sputtered. Without the continuous stream of data from the yacht's remote terminal, the missile's flight computer defaulted to its emergency safety protocol. It pulled its nose up into a vertical climb. It reached 3,000 feet, then stalled. "Target is behaving erratically," the Iranian battery commander shouted. "It is falling. Should I fire?" "Wait," General Mansour's voice came over the speaker. "The signal is gone. Look at the missile." The Tomahawk did not explode. It did not dive into a building. Its internal logic, stripped of its hijacked instructions, recognized it was over a prohibited zone. Without a valid target, it deployed a small recovery parachute from its tail. Then, the silver missile drifted slowly toward the ground. It landed in a vacant construction lot 3 miles from the city center. It did not detonate, it simply sat in the dust. A long pause, then silence. 9 o'clock and 3 minutes in the morning. A construction site on the northern edge of Tehran. The dust from the landing settled. The Tomahawk lay across a pile of rebar and gravel. Its recovery parachute draped over its fuselage like a white shroud. It was silent. It was intact. It was a billion-dollar American asset sitting in the middle of an Iranian city. Inside the Iranian command center, General Mansour watched the live feed from a nearby security camera. The red dot on his tactical map had stopped moving. The threat was stationary. "The intruder has landed," an officer whispered. "It did not detonate. The Americans have delivered a cruise missile to our doorstep. Secure the perimeter," Mansour ordered. "I want a 3-mile exclusion zone. No one touches that weapon until the technical teams from the Revolutionary Guard arrive. This is no longer a tactical threat. It is a forensic goldmine." 9 o'clock and 5 minutes in the morning. The USS Higgins. The bridge was a scene of exhausted relief, but the commander knew the danger had only shifted. He looked at the empty space on his display, where the missile track had been. "Sir, the missile is down. High-resolution satellite confirms it landed in a vacant lot. It appears to be mostly intact." "And the yacht?" the commander asked. "Confirmed destroyed by the Iranian Phantoms. No survivors reported. The wreckage is sinking in 200 meters of water." The commander turned to his executive officer. "We just gave the Iranians a Block 5 Tomahawk. The guidance package, the stealth coating, the engine. They have it all. Better than giving them a reason to fire 1,000 missiles at us, sir," the officer replied. "Maybe. But we need to know who was on that boat." A note before continuing. This is a fictional military scenario, created for narrative and analytical purposes only. It does not depict real events, real operations, or classified information. The pivot had occurred. The crisis of the missile flight was over, but the mystery of the ghost orbit was just beginning. Both the United States and Iran had looked into the abyss of a full-scale war, triggered by a third party. Neither side had liked what they saw. In Washington, the president was briefed. The order was given to maintain a defensive posture, but to cease all aggressive maneuvers. In Tehran, the Supreme National Security Council met in emergency session. The decision was made to allow the Americans to observe the recovery of the missile from a distance, provided no U.S. aircraft entered the zone. The two nations were now tied together by a piece of fallen technology and a destroyed yacht. The realization was beginning to sink in for both commands. The most advanced weapons in their arsenals were vulnerable. The security of their borders was no longer just a matter of radars and missiles. It was a matter of code. The morning sun was high now. The heat overcame minus. The Persian Gulf was intense. The immediate threat of fire had passed, but the air remained thick with the smell of the coming investigation. 9 o'clock and 10 minutes in the morning. The Pentagon and Tehran. The immediate crisis of the inbound strike had evaporated, but the transition to the second phase of the crisis was instantaneous. Intelligence agencies on both sides of the world were now racing to identify the Phantom on the yacht. In Washington, analysts from the National Security Agency were already reverse engineering the signal path that had led to the Strait of Hormuz. "We have a preliminary trace on the satellite handshake," a lead analyst reported to the Secretary of Defense. The command and control software was routed through a series of encrypted nodes in Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia, but the source code for the override itself has a very specific signature. "Is it a state actor?" the Secretary asked. "The architecture suggests a private military contractor or a high-end cyber mercenary group. It is a zero-day exploit specifically designed for the Tomahawk's Block 5 navigation suite. This was not a general hack. It was a surgical strike against our command of the weapon." 9:15 in the morning, the Persian Gulf. Over the sinking remains of the yacht, Captain Rezai circled his Phantom jet. He watched the white foam and the spreading oil slick. There were no life rafts, no survivors, just the debris of a luxury lifestyle and the shattered remnants of a high-powered electronic warfare suite. "Control, the target is neutralized," Rezai reported. "I am detecting no further electronic interference. My radar is back to full capability. My wingman is also clear." "Copy. Captain. Return to base for debriefing. Do not engage any American assets. Repeat. Do not engage." 9:20 in the morning. The USS Higgins. The ship remained at high alert, but the tension had shifted from the weapons consoles to the intelligence deck. The Combat Information Center was receiving a data dump from the 5th Fleet's regional surveillance assets. "Sir, we have a registration on the yacht," the intelligence officer said, leaning over the commander's shoulder. The vessel was the Aurelia. It was registered to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Its last port of call was Dubai, 3 days ago. "Who was on the manifest?" the commander asked. 13 crew members and 4 passengers. The passengers were listed as technical consultants for a maritime security firm. "But the names are all aliases. We are running the facial recognition from the port's security cameras now." The commander looked at the screen. "Someone spent a lot of money to start a war today. They knew our software. They knew the Iranian response patterns. They knew exactly where to sit to bridge the gap." 9:25 in the morning. The construction site in Tehran. Specialized units of the Revolutionary Guard's technical wing arrived at the vacant lot. They were wearing full tactical gear, but they carried electronic scanners and radiation detectors instead of rifles. They approached the Tomahawk with a mixture of caution and intense curiosity. The lead technician knelt beside the missile's nose cone. He ran a handheld sensor along the seam where the guidance computer was housed. A series of red lights flashed on his device. "It is still active," the technician said through his radio. "The internal battery is maintaining a low-power state. It is still trying to talk to something." "Can you isolate it?" a voice asked. From the command van. "I am trying, but the encryption is changing every 3 seconds. It is like the missile is trying to delete its own memory." "Stop it," the voice ordered. "If that memory is wiped, we lose the proof of who sent it. This is no longer just a missile. It is a witness." The realization was spreading through both military commands. The rogue missile was not just an accident or an act of war. It was a high-stakes play by a third party designed to trigger a conflict that neither nation wanted. The two rivals, for the first time in decades, found themselves sharing a common enemy. An enemy that lived in the shadows of the digital world. 9:30 in the morning. The construction site, Tehran. The vacant lot was now a fortress. Iranian military vehicles blocked every entrance. 2 snipers sat on the roof of a half-finished apartment building. They were not looking for enemies. They were watching the silver tube in the dirt. Inside the command van, the Iranian technical lead, Colonel Ershadi, was on a satellite link. The screen showed a secure, text-based interface. It was a direct connection to a terminal in Bahrain. "The missile is in a low-power cycling state," Ershadi typed. It is attempting to initiate a wide-area broadcast. We are jammed, but the internal processor is heating up. We suspect a self-destruct sequence is being triggered by the loss of the primary signal. The response from the American side came in seconds. Do not attempt to cut the power. The Block 5 has a tamper circuit. If the voltage drops, the memory will wipe. We are sending a specific bypass code. It will put the logic into a deep sleep. You must input this via the maintenance port behind the fuel intake. Urshadi looked at his team. This was the moment of maximum risk. If the Americans were lying, the code could detonate the remaining fuel. If they were telling the truth, they were handing over the keys to their most advanced software. We are moving to the missile, Urshadi replied. 9:38 in the morning. The USS Higgins. The bridge crew was watching the infrared feed from a high-altitude drone. They saw the heat signature of the Iranian technician as he crawled toward the Tomahawk. He is at the port, the weapons officer whispered. He is opening the panel. Admiral Miller is on the line, the radio operator said. She wants to know if the handshake is complete. The commander did not look away from the screen. Not yet. The Iranian has to trust our sequence. One wrong digit, and that site becomes a crater. Inside the lot, Urshadi's hands were steady inside his heavy gloves. He plugged a ruggedized tablet into the missile's maintenance port. The screen flickered with red text. Warning. Unauthorized access detected. Integrity purge in 60 seconds. I am entering the code now, Urshadi said into his headset. He typed the string of 42 characters, provided by the Americans. He held his breath. The red text on his tablet turned green. The low hum, coming from the missile's internal cooling fans, died down. The silver body of the weapon seemed to settle into the dust. Handshake confirmed, Urshadi reported. The logic is dormant. The witness is safe. 9:45 in the morning. The Pentagon. A cheer went up in the National Military Command Center. It was brief and professional, but the relief was palpable. The Secretary of Defense leaned back in his chair. The Iranians have the missile, the Secretary said, and we have the data from the yacht. Now we find out who tried to burn the world down this morning. Sir, an analyst interrupted. We just got the first facial recognition match from the Dubai port cameras. One of the passengers on that yacht was not a mercenary. The secretary turned. Who was it? He is a former software architect for the original Tomahawk program. He disappeared 3 years ago. His last known bank transfers were traced to a private equity firm with no physical address. The mystery was no longer about a rogue missile. It was about a rogue element within the system itself. The de-escalation was working, but the realization was chilling. The weapon had not malfunctioned. It had been told to do exactly what it did. 10 o'clock in the morning, the Persian Gulf, the USS Higgins, began to turn south. Its mission in the area was over. The Iranian Phantoms had already landed. For the first time in hours, the air over the Gulf was truly quiet. Both sides were backing away from the edge. They were no longer looking at each other through their gun sights. They were both looking at the empty space where the yacht had been. 10:15 in the morning. Central Command, Bahrain. The immediate kinetic threat had passed, but the logistical and political resolution was only beginning. On the primary tactical display, the red dot representing the Tomahawk had turned white. It was now a static asset. Vice Admiral Miller stood at the glass partition overlooking the operations floor. The Iranians are requesting a joint technical team, her chief of staff said. They are offering neutral ground, a secure hangar at an airfield in Oman. They want to hand over the missile, but they want to be present when we pull the flight recorder. They do not trust us to tell them the truth about the hack, Miller said. And honestly, I do not blame them. If the tables were turned, I would want my own engineers in that room. The White House has approved the transfer, the officer continued. The Omanis are clearing a corridor. We are sending a C-17 transport from Qatar. The Iranians will move the missile across the border by truck. 10:30 in the morning. The construction site in Tehran. The recovery was in full swing. A heavy lift crane, draped in camouflage netting, lowered a cradle over the missile. Iranian soldiers worked alongside engineers in civilian clothing. There was no shouting, no triumphant slogans. The atmosphere was one of grim, focused professionalism. They knew the world was watching through satellite lenses. Colonel Ershadi watched as the Tomahawk was lifted clear of the gravel. He looked at the American markings on the side of the weapon. For decades, this machine had been a symbol of the threat his country faced. Today, it was a shared burden. "Load it," Ershadi commanded. "We move in 15 minutes. No stops, no delays." As the truck moved out of the lot, escorted by a dozen armored vehicles, the residents of the nearby apartments watched from their balconies. They did not know how close their city had come to a catastrophe. They only saw a silver shape under a tarp, moving slowly through the morning traffic. 11 o'clock in the morning. The North Arabian Sea. The USS Higgins was now 40 nautical miles from the Iranian coast. The crew had stood down from general quarters. The adrenaline of the morning was fading, replaced by a deep, hollow fatigue. In the Combat Information Center, the technicians were still scrubbing the data logs. "Sir," the weapons officer said, his voice raspy, "I am looking at the final telemetry from the yacht before the Phantoms hit it." There was an outgoing burst transmission just as the first missile struck. "Where did it go?" the commander asked. It was a high-frequency skip. It was not aimed at a satellite. It was aimed at the shore, a receiver somewhere in the mountains along the coast. The commander rubbed his eyes. So the yacht was the bridge, but it was not the brain. The person running the show was on land. "Yes, sir. And that person is still out there." They watched the whole thing play out. They watched us and the Iranians cooperate to stop it. The resolution was not a victory. It was a stay of execution. The crisis had been averted because individual commanders on the ground and in the air had chosen to talk instead of fire. They had recognized a pattern that did not fit the traditional rules of engagement. They had seen the ghost in the machine and decided not to chase it into a war. The Tomahawk was on its way to Oman. The USS Higgins was heading for its next patrol station. The immediate danger was over, but the realization remained. The lines between a technical error, a private act of terror, and a state-sponsored attack had blurred into a single, terrifying gray zone. 3 days later, Muscat, Oman. The heat shimmered over the tarmac of a secluded military hangar on the outskirts of the airport. Inside the cavernous space, the air was conditioned to a precise 68 degrees. Under the bright overhead LED lights, the silver Tomahawk sat on a raised steel dais. It looked smaller here than it had in the grainy satellite feeds. Around it, 2 teams of engineers worked in a silence that was both tense and respectful. One team wore the digital camouflage of the United States Navy. The other wore the olive drab of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. A senior American forensic analyst, Dr. Eris Thorne, stood at a portable workstation. He was looking at a line of code extracted from the missile's primary flight recorder. Beside him stood Colonel Ershadi. They were no longer adversaries. They were 2 mechanics looking at a broken engine. "There it is," Thorne said. He pointed to a sequence of hexadecimal values on the screen. The logic bomb. It was set to trigger the moment the missile crossed the 24th parallel. It didn't just override the GPS, it created a virtual target. Ershadi leaned in, his glasses reflecting the blue light of the monitor. A virtual target at the Bushehr reactor. But the missile did not strike. Why did it flare and land? "Because of the second override," Thorne explained. "The one we found in the yacht's wreckage. It was a kill switch. The person controlling the missile wasn't trying to start a war with a bang. They were trying to start it with a whisper. They wanted you to see it. They wanted us to react. The landing was a failsafe to ensure the technology was recovered. They wanted the tension to stay high. They wanted us to find the proof of an American attack. That never was," Ershadi said quietly. "A ghost mission." The 2 men looked at the missile. For 48 hours, the world's financial markets had been in a tailspin. Both nations had moved their carrier groups and missile batteries to the highest state of readiness. Only the direct, frantic communication between the USS Higgins and the Iranian radar stations had prevented the first shots. "The audit is complete," Thorne said, closing his laptop. The hardware is yours to inspect for another 12 hours. Then, per the agreement, it is crated and returned to the Fifth Fleet." "We have seen enough," Ershadi replied. "Our report will state that the incident was the result of a third-party interference. We will not seek further escalation. But, Doctor, tell your superiors one thing. The next time, the Ghost might not choose to land." 1 week later, Washington, D.C. The hearing room in the Hart Senate office building was closed to the press. Behind the mahogany dais, members of the Senate Armed Services Committee sat in shadow. Vice Admiral Miller stood at the witness lectern. She looked tired, but her voice was as sharp as a bayonet. "The investigation into the Aurelia yacht is ongoing," Miller testified. "But we have confirmed the identity of the primary architect. It was a private group, funded by an offshore conglomerate that benefits from high-volatility energy prices. They didn't need a country. They only needed a credit line and a few disgruntled engineers." "Admiral," a senator interrupted, "are you telling this committee that our most advanced strategic weapons can be turned against us by a private corporation?" "I am telling you that the battlefield is no longer a geographical location," Miller replied. "It is the software update. It is the supply chain." The USS Higgins followed every protocol. The crew of that ship and the Iranian pilots who destroyed that yacht are the only reason we are sitting here today in peace. They chose to believe their eyes instead of their instruments. The Admiral paused. She looked at the classified folder on the lectern. Modern warfare is often described as a game of chess, but chess assumes both players are visible. In this case, we were both playing a ghost. And the ghost almost won. The room was silent. The strategic assessment was clear. The era of the unhackable weapon was over. The stability of the world now rested on a fragile thread of human communication that moved faster than the algorithms designed to destroy it. 10 o'clock in the morning, 1 week after the intercept, the North Arabian Sea, the USS Higgins, was back on station. The water was a deep, undisturbed sapphire, showing no scars from the event that had nearly set the region on fire. On the bridge, the commander stood by the starboard rail. He watched the horizon through a pair of high-powered binoculars. The sea was empty, but he knew the space was more crowded than it had ever been. "Strategic assessment is finalized, sir," the executive officer said, stepping onto the bridge. He held a secure tablet. "The final report from the Joint Task Force in Oman has been uploaded to the Pentagon. They are calling it a non-state kinetic provocation, a fancy name for a nightmare," the commander said. He didn't take his eyes off the horizon. "How many more of those logic bombs are sitting in our magazines? How many are in theirs?" "The Navy is conducting a fleet-wide software audit, sir. Every Block 5 is being pulled and recertified. The Iranians are reportedly doing the same with their coastal defense grids. For the moment, everyone is checking their own shadows." The event would not appear in the history books of the next decade. There were no sunken ships to count, no shattered cities to rebuild, and no heroes to decorate in public ceremonies. It would remain a classified entry in the archives of two nations that remained bitter rivals. But in the quiet corridors of power, the lesson had been learned. The weapon was no longer the missile itself. The weapon was the doubt it created. Military analysts would later agree that the crisis was not resolved by technology. It was resolved by the failure of technology. When the digital displays became unreliable, when the radars were blinded, and when the automated systems turned rogue, the humans in the loop were forced to talk. A radio call between a destroyer and a radar station had been more powerful than 100 interceptors. "Sir," the radio operator called out, "I have a bridge-to-bridge transmission. It is the Iranian patrol boat on the 12-mile limit." The commander picked up the handset. "This is the USS Higgins. State your intentions." There was a long pause. The static hissed, a reminder of the vast, empty distance between them. Then, a voice came through. It was the same professional, measured tone from the morning of the launch. "USS Higgins, this is the Islamic Republic of Iran Navy. We are maintaining our station. The sea is clear today. We wish you a safe passage." "Copy," the commander replied. "The sea is clear." Safe passage to you as well. The commander put the handset down. He knew the peace was fragile. He knew that somewhere, in a basement or on a private server, another piece of code was being written. Another ghost was being prepared for its orbit. But for today, the humans were still in control. Modern warfare is often decided not by who fires first, but by who chooses not to fire at all. The greatest victory of the Higgins was not a target destroyed or a mission accomplished. It was the silence that followed the storm. The world had looked into the abyss, and for one brief, terrifying morning, it had decided to step back. The sun began to dip toward the water, casting long, golden shadows across the deck of the destroyer. The morning had been a warning. The future remained unwritten.